You have felt it before. The sudden drop in temperature in her voice, the way her eyes no longer search for yours, the invisible wall she builds mid-conversation without explanation. You replay your words in your head, wondering what you said wrong, what gesture or tone made her shift from warmth to frost. And as you begin to question yourself, she grows even more distant. That distance is not accidental. It is a signal. It is a test. And if you misinterpret it, if you try to melt it with desperate warmth, you will lose her entirely. Friedrich Nietzsche saw this pattern not only in romance, but in the broader theater of human power. He warned that beneath civility and affection, there is always a game of strength, a quiet battle for who will lead the dance. When a woman turns cold, she is not simply punishing you. She is measuring you. She is assessing whether your presence is built on unshakable ground or on the shifting sand of her approval. This is the single truth Nietzsche would drill into you. She does not respect the man who needs her warmth to stand tall. She respects the man whose fire is self-contained, whose value is not handed to him, but radiates from within, immune to the seasons of her mood. If you understand this, you will never again panic at her coldness. You will see it for what it is, an invitation to prove that you do not orbit her sun because you are your own. And that, paradoxically, is when her frost melts fastest. The moment she sees that you can live without her warmth, she becomes addicted to giving it. The first scenario is simple in appearance yet lethal in consequence. You are at a crowded social gathering, speaking with her in the warm glow of initial chemistry. There is laughter. There is the slight lean of her body toward yours. There is that bright curiosity in her eyes. Then, without warning, she shifts her weight away, glances around the room, and her tone drops into something cooler, less engaged. The hidden test here is primal. By withdrawing her warmth, she triggers an ancient fear in you, the fear of exile from the tribe, the loss of mating approval. Evolution wired men to seek immediate re-entry into the circle when expelled, because rejection once meant survival risk. Psychologically, this coldness is her way of shaking the ladder to see if you cling tighter or stand firm. She is activating the predator-prey dynamic that Nietzsche understood well. In every relationship, one is subtly proving strength, while the other tests for weakness. She is not consciously plotting this like a strategist at a chessboard. It is instinct. But instinct is the most unforgiving judge, because it does not accept explanations. The weak male response in this moment is to close the gap in a panic. He tries harder, leans in more, overcompensates with jokes, compliments, or a sudden shift into vulnerability to win her back. In doing so, he broadcasts that her mood determines his mood. His frame collapses entirely because he shows that his sense of worth is tethered to her current evaluation. Nietzsche would say that he has placed himself under her in the hierarchy because he has allowed her emotional weather to control his internal climate. From here, attraction corrodes quickly. She senses his need to be liked, his fear of disconnection. The spark she felt earlier is replaced by a subtle contempt, because he has revealed himself as one who seeks permission to stand tall rather than standing tall as a birthright. Every additional attempt to warm her is interpreted as lower status signaling, and each word reinforces that he is not the man who can lead the dance. The power response here is the opposite of compensation. It is stillness. It is allowing her shift to happen without chasing it. You continue the conversation at your own pace, even redirecting attention to others or to something unrelated to her sudden withdrawal. The subcommunication is devastatingly effective. Her coldness does not register as a threat to you. Your inner fire is not at the mercy of her temperature. Nietzsche's philosophy comes alive here, master morality versus slave morality. The man rooted in master morality does not ask, "How do I regain her?" He asks, "Does this serve me?" And in that stance, he displays the highest form of value, indifference to conditional approval. He reveals that her attempt to destabilize only proves his stability. The shift in her perception is immediate and disorienting. She expected pursuit, a sign that she held the power. Instead, she finds herself pulled toward a man unmoved by her withdrawal. Confusion sets in first. Why did her tactic fail? Then intrigue. What kind of man is so certain in himself that he can meet her coldness with warmth, not aimed at her, but emanating from himself? Over the long term, this becomes obsession. She now sees him as a man with access to a deeper source of value, a source she wants to tap into. Every interaction after this is colored by the memory of that moment when she tried to pull him into her storm, and he stood, unmoved, until the storm passed and she found herself stepping back into his sun. The second scenario unfolds in the quieter, more intimate arena of digital communication. You have been exchanging messages with her for days or weeks, a back-and-forth rhythm that feels natural and even addictive. She replies quickly. She engages with depth. She sends you little signals of playfulness or curiosity. Then, abruptly, her response is slow. Hours pass between her texts. The words become shorter, stripped of their earlier emotional charge. This is not accidental. This is another hidden test. In the evolutionary past, access to someone's attention and time was a finite resource, fiercely guarded. By pulling away in the digital space, she forces you into an emotional scarcity state, provoking that same ancient anxiety about losing connection. She wants to know if your sense of stability is dependent on her constant engagement, or if you possess the strength to operate unaffected in the vacuum she creates. The real danger lies not in the gap between messages, but in what it draws out of you, temptation to fill that silence with pursuit. The weak response here is almost universal among men who have not grasped Nietzsche's warning. They double their effort to re-establish the previous tempo, sending multiple messages in a row, trying humor, compliments, even guilt-inducing lines about her absence. This frantic energy does not land as devotion. It lands as dependency. She sees in his behavior the truth that he cannot hold his frame when his supply of her attention is cut. Nietzsche would say that he has now revealed the slave morality of one who reacts to external shifts rather than commanding his own reality. The man has ceded power by making her the arbiter of his emotional state. Once this perception takes hold, her curiosity about him diminishes. His energy is predictable. When rewarded, he is warm. When denied, he becomes restless and needy. There is no mystery, no edge, no evidence that he possesses the internal abundance that renders him immune to small withdrawals of contact. The power response in this scenario is measured silence. You do not match her withdrawal with pursuit. You match it with unshaken composure. When her replies slow, yours remain on your own schedule, unaltered by the gap. You may even become slightly less available, not out of petty retaliation, but as a byproduct of your life being full. The deeper message here is that her availability does not dictate your behavior. Nietzsche's insights into the will to power illuminate this dynamic. The man who holds power does not beg for attention, because he is already engaged in the creation and expansion of his own world. She is either drawn into that orbit or she is not, but his orbit does not collapse if she drifts to the edge. This stance is not arrogance, it is sovereignty. It demonstrates that you are the source, not the seeker. The shift in her perception here is subtle yet profound. At first, she might tell herself you are simply busy, but as the pattern holds, she feels the tension of not knowing where she stands with you. That uncertainty is intoxicating because it reverses the dynamic. Now she is the one seeking re-entry into your attention. She may start replying faster, adding more emotional color to her words, even inventing reasons to reach out. What began as her test to measure your strength now becomes her silent quest to earn a place in your focus. And because you have not reacted to her initial withdrawal, you remain in the position of control without having lifted a finger to reclaim it. Nietzsche would call this the quiet triumph of strength over reaction. You did not need to prove your worth through chasing. You proved it through your lack of need to chase. Her respect grows not because you ignored her, but because your life is clearly more than a waiting room for her replies. This, more than any text you could have sent, communicates that you are a man whose fire burns whether or not she feeds it. The third scenario takes place in the early stages of a date, when the environment is set for warmth, but she introduces a sudden and calculated drop in energy. You meet her at a cozy, dimly lit venue. She greets you with a smile, her eyes bright, the conversation flowing easily. Then, somewhere between the second sip of wine and the next topic, she begins to answer more briefly. Her gaze wanders, and she sits back as though disengaging. This moment is layered with instinct and psychology. The hidden test here is a stress check on your composure under pressure. In the animal kingdom, displays of dominance are often tested by subtle acts of defiance, turning away, breaking eye contact, shifting posture to see if the other party reacts from a place of insecurity. Her coldness is the human version of this. By pulling away, she is not always signaling disinterest, but rather probing for cracks in your frame. She wants to see if your confidence was a performance sustained by her enthusiasm, or if it is a structural part of you that survives even when her feedback is withheld. This is not cruelty. It is survival programming. She needs to feel that the man she considers is not just stable when things are going well, but also unshaken when they are not. The weak male response in this moment is immediate overcompensation. He detects the shift in her energy and panics, rushing to regain her warmth. He may lean forward, force eye contact, change topics frantically, compliment her, or steer the conversation into emotional territory prematurely in hopes of pulling her back in. Each of these actions transmits the same signal. Her temporary disconnection destabilizes him. Nietzsche would interpret this as the man revealing that his strength is reactive, not inherent. The collapse happens because he makes her engagement the fuel for his confidence, proving that without her validation, he cannot sustain himself. This shifts her internal calculus. Rather than seeing him as the unshakable pillar she is seeking, she now sees someone whose power evaporates under mild resistance. In the language of attraction, the aura of inevitability is gone. She now feels safe in the knowledge that she can control his emotional state, and control kills desire. The power response is to treat her shift as entirely irrelevant to your sense of self. You keep speaking at your pace, your tone steady, your body language unchanged. You may even introduce a pause, letting silence become a tool rather than a fear, before shifting the focus to something outside of her, entirely a comment to the waiter, a glance at your surroundings, a change in subject to a story you wanted to tell. The message is clear. Her momentary withdrawal has no leverage over you. Nietzsche's concept of the Bermensch, a man who defines his own values and stands apart from the herd's approval, is in full expression here. You are not adapting your behavior to reclaim her. You are acting from the same centered place you occupied before she shifted. This is power that does not need to announce itself, because it is self-evident. The shift in her perception begins almost invisibly. She notices that her withdrawal did not produce the ripple she expected. Where another man might have scrambled to recapture her warmth, you remained the same, as though you were not even aware of the cold wind she tried to send your way. This absence of reaction becomes a mirror, forcing her to examine her own motives and even her own interest. Slowly, intrigue replaces her detachment. She leans in again, not because you pulled her back, but because she realizes she might lose her place in your attention if she remains distant. In her mind, you become a man who cannot be manipulated through emotional temperature shifts. Over time, this memory cements into a story she tells herself about you, that you are the rare man whose presence is not a performance but a constant. This story is dangerous to her sense of control and addictive to her desire, because it positions you as the one who leads without ever needing to fight for the role. The fourth scenario arises in the aftermath of a conflict, where emotions are raw and her coldness is at its most biting. You have argued or disagreed, and now she responds with silence, clipped answers, or averted eyes. The atmosphere thickens with tension, every word weighed down by the unspoken. This coldness is a deliberate weapon, and here lies its psychological purpose. It is the testing ground for your capacity to absorb rejection without fracturing your identity. Evolutionarily, conflict between mates has always been a crucible for trust and hierarchy. The withdrawal of warmth after confrontation is a primal cue asking, "Do you have the strength to withstand my displeasure and remain a source of stability?" The fear she activates is the most elemental fear of abandonment and loss of alliance. Her coldness forces you into a crucible where your self-worth must be independent of her approval. The weak response is one of emotional escalation or collapse. He attempts to patch the wound through excessive apology, pleading, or over-explaining. Often, he floods her with messages seeking to soothe her or gainsaying his own actions. Nietzsche would identify this as the descent into slave morality, where the man places himself at the mercy of external validation rather than asserting internal authority. This response signals that his foundation is built on fragile consent, and once that consent is withheld, he crumbles. The consequences are immediate and brutal. His desperation lowers his status in her eyes, confirms her power over him, and transforms attraction into pity or contempt. She no longer sees him as the strong partner, but as a supplicant, which extinguishes desire faster than any outright rejection could. The power response is to embody quiet resilience. This means accepting her coldness without reactive anxiety and maintaining your demeanor as if the emotional temperature were irrelevant to your core. Instead of flooding her with words, you offer presence without pressure. You hold your frame by remaining calm, measured, and consistent. Nietzsche's notion of the will to power here manifests as emotional sovereignty, the ability to remain master of your internal world regardless of external turbulence. By not begging for warmth, you reclaim your status as the arbiter of the emotional ecosystem. Your silence, paradoxically, becomes the loudest message. It communicates that you are too valuable to be destabilized by transient storms. The shift in her perception begins with surprise, then respect. Her expectation that her coldness will topple you is shattered. She is forced to reconcile the dissonance between her withdrawal and your unshaken presence. Over time, this transforms into fascination. She becomes mentally engaged in deciphering the mystery of a man whose power cannot be eroded by rejection. This curiosity deepens into attraction because desire thrives on challenge and strength. The coldness she wielded as a weapon now becomes a spark for the fire she feels toward you. This interaction changes the entire dynamic. You are no longer the man who chases, but the man who invites. Her narrative about you evolves from one of control to one of admiration. She unconsciously prioritizes your approval, even if she does not express it openly. The relationship's power axis realigns to your favor, grounded in your refusal to be fractured by emotional withdrawal. The fifth and final scenario is the most intense, a moment when she acts cold, not out of playfulness or testing, but as a defense mechanism against vulnerability and fear. Imagine a situation where she reveals a deep insecurity or a painful part of her past, and instead of receiving empathy, she retreats abruptly into silence and emotional distance. This coldness is no longer a test. It is a shield forged from survival instincts. Her fear is primal, the terror of exposure, rejection, and abandonment. In evolutionary terms, revealing weakness risked social death, so retreating into coldness was the safest refuge. The hidden test now is whether you can remain a steady harbor in the storm of her inner chaos. The weak response here is to interpret her coldness as rejection and respond with frustration, confusion, or withdrawal. Many men instinctively recoil or attempt to break through with logic or insistence. This reaction, however well-intentioned, communicates a failure to hold space for her vulnerability. Nietzsche would recognize this as the failure to embody the Bohrmensche strength, the power to create meaning and value in the face of suffering rather than flee it. By rejecting or pushing against her coldness, the man reveals that his capacity for acceptance is limited, that he requires her warmth to sustain his own emotional equilibrium. This collapse reinforces her protective wall and deepens her distance. The power response in this scenario is radical acceptance combined with unwavering presence. You do not demand that she explain or re-engage immediately. Instead, you create a psychological environment that communicates safety without pressure. This means holding your frame as a rock, showing that your value does not fluctuate with her emotional availability, and demonstrating patience as a form of strength. Nietzsche's philosophy teaches that true power is the mastery of oneself in the face of chaos. By embracing this, you become the source of calm that can draw her out of her defensive coldness on her own timeline. Your silence becomes an invitation rather than a weapon. The shift in her perception is profound and transformative. Initially, she may perceive your calm as detachment, but over time, she recognizes it as strength and reliability. She feels the magnetic pull of a man who can hold space for her pain without being consumed by it. This creates a deep psychological bond, one that transcends superficial attraction and moves into the realm of genuine connection and desire. She becomes drawn to you not only as a partner, but as a sanctuary. Her coldness, once a barrier, becomes a bridge. This dynamic redefines your relationship, placing you firmly in the role of leader and protector, the man whose fire neither demands nor fears her frost. The practical arsenal you can deploy to meet these coldness tests is deceptively simple, yet profoundly effective. In every scenario, the power response centers on maintaining your internal fire-steadfast composure, measured silence, and emotional sovereignty. These are not tricks or manipulations, but expressions of deep value and self-mastery. When she acts cold, resist the urge to fill the silence or chase approval. Instead, embody the Nietzschean ideal of the Übermensch, who stands beyond reactive emotions, creating meaning and value from within. The strongest response is indifference to her conditional warmth, which paradoxically draws her closer by signaling abundance and freedom. Practically, this means controlling your breathing and body language to exude calm confidence, pacing your communication to your own rhythm, and refusing to be destabilized by her withdrawal. Each action signals that you are the master of your emotional climate, not its servant. In conclusion, Nietzsche's warning is clear and timeless. A woman's coldness is a crucible, not a curse. It exposes whether your strength is performative or inherent. By meeting her coldness with the quiet power of self-possession, you rewrite the story of attraction. You stop being a man who chases approval and become the man whose presence commands desire. This transformation is not about control or manipulation. It is about embodying an irresistible form of value that no withdrawal of warmth can extinguish. When you embrace this truth, her frost becomes your forge. Your challenge now is to practice these principles relentlessly, turning every moment of coldness into a stage for your unshakable power. For the next step, watch our deep dive into Nietzsche's concept of the Übermensch and how embodying it rewrites the rules of modern attraction. This is not just philosophy. It is a blueprint for transformation.